Okay, so this week we dug into something pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah.
You know, an analysis from the Motley Fool.
Oh, yeah.
And it really got us thinking about Freeport McMoRan.
Oh, interesting.
You know, ticker symbol FCX.
Okay.
Big copper producer. And their stock is down like 37%.
Whoa. 37%.
From its all-time high.
Okay.
Which is
yeah.
kind of wild when you consider that copper prices are near their peak.
I mean, that seems like a strange...
Yeah, it's kind of a head-scratcher.
Yeah.
So this Motley Fool article, which was written by Lee Samaha,
Okay.
and it was published on Fool.com yesterday, March 27th, 2025.
Got it.
They're actually suggesting that this might be a buying opportunity.
Interesting.
So we kind of wanted to break down, you know, like what's going on here.
Yeah.
Why is this happening?
For sure.
Why is there this disconnect?
A classic market head-scratcher.
You know, between the stock price and the price of copper?
Absolutely. And for folks who might not know, the Motley Fool, they've been around for quite some time, I think since 1993.
Yeah.
And their whole mission is to kind of make the world smarter, happier, and richer.
Through investing.
Yeah, through investing. And I think this analysis really does highlight a pretty fascinating disconnect in the market. And what we wanted to do today is kind of unpack that for you guys, you know?
Right.
Why is this big copper company...
Why is the stock struggling?
Struggling, yeah, when copper itself is so valuable.
Right.
You know, what are the arguments for a potential turnaround? And how does this all fit into the larger economic picture? You know, what's this telling us about where things might be headed?
Yeah, and by the end, hopefully you'll have a much clearer understanding of what's going on and why it might matter to you.
Yeah, why you should care. So,
yeah,
okay,
let's jump right into it.
Yeah.
You know, Freeport McMoRan, this giant in copper mining.
Huge company.
Yeah. Has seen its stock really take a hit.
It's been on a bit of a slide.
Yeah. And as of yesterday afternoon, it was trading at $39.99.
Okay.
Which puts the company at a market value of about $57 billion.
Yeah.
But it's not just a historical drop, right?
Yeah.
It went down.
It's recent.
Another 3.62% or $1.50 just yesterday.
Wow. So it's still...
So the downward momentum seems pretty recent.
Yeah, it's continuing.
But like we said, copper is actually fetching a pretty high price right now.
Right.
So according to the analysis, what is the main reason for this divergence?
Well, they point to a couple of key factors that seem to be spooking investors.
Okay.
The first one, a fire that happened at a newly opened copper smelter in Indonesia.
In Indonesia.
Yeah, and this is where it gets interesting because you need to understand Indonesia's kind of new policy to grasp the significance of this.
Right, because this is pretty recent, right?
Yeah, this is very recent.
The export ban.
Yeah. So as of January 1st, 2025, they put a ban on exporting unprocessed copper concentrate.
Okay, so essentially what they're trying to do is keep the copper in Indonesia.
Encourage domestic processing of raw materials.
Okay.
Keep it all in Indonesia.
So that obviously puts Freeport in kind of a tough spot.
Yeah. This is where it gets tricky for Freeport.
Because they have, you know, big operations in Indonesia.
Right. Huge operations.
And now they need a permit to export.
Yeah, to export any of the concentrate they mine there.
And with the fire at the smelter,
right,
they can't process as much domestically.
Right, they're operating at a reduced capacity.
Which leads to the question that the article brings up, which is, will Freeport run out of places to store?
That's a big question.
All this copper concentrate.
Yeah, what do you do with all that copper?
They can't process or ship out.
It's a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
You know, you can imagine having all this material piling up.
It's a huge financial headache.
Oh, absolutely. Huge financial burden.
But there's a bit of good news.
There is a little bit of a silver lining here.
Yep.
Indonesia's energy minister, Bahlil Lahadalia, says that the government is going to grant Freeport a temporary 6-month export permit while the smelter is being repaired.
So they bought themselves some time.
Yeah, that gives them a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah.
To get things back on track. Yeah.
So that's good.
That's a positive development for sure.
Yeah, so that 6-month window is crucial.
Absolutely.
But now the second factor that the analysis points to is a little bit more speculative.
This one's a little bit trickier.
It involves potential U.S. tariffs on copper imports.
Yeah, a lot of uncertainty around that.
Yeah. So can you kind of walk us through?
Of course.
Yeah.
So basically the thinking is that the recent price increase we've seen in copper in the U.S. might be driven in part by importers and speculators who are betting that these tariffs are going to be put in place.
Yeah.
The worry is that if those tariffs don't materialize,
or if the global supply and demand picture shifts, this artificially inflated demand could suddenly disappear.
It's all about that uncertainty.
It is. It's the nature of the beast.
Trying to predict commodity prices.
Well, it's a guessing game.
Feels like a gamble.
Always a gamble.
And the article even says,
it acknowledges
that this is more of a speculative concern.
Yeah.
But the analysis does bring up a really important counterpoint, which is that the global benchmark price for copper traded on the London Metal Exchange.
The LME.
The LME has also been rising significantly.
Yeah, throughout 2025, it's been on an upward trend.
So this suggests that it's not just a U.S. thing.
Exactly. It's a global phenomenon.
There are broader global factors.
It's bigger than just the U.S.
that are supporting these higher prices.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's not just
about tariffs.
Speculation about
it's a global demand story.
U.S. tariffs.
Yeah.
So despite all of this stuff,
the issues with the Indonesian smelter, the tariff speculation, the Motley Fool article is still pretty optimistic.
They're bullish on Freeport.
About Freeport McMoRan.
Yeah.
So what are the main reasons they think?
What's driving their optimism?
The company is actually in a strong position.
Well, one of the things they emphasize is Freeport's presence in the United States. They have huge operations here. They produce a ton of copper right here in the U.S. And they're mostly serving the American market.
So they're not relying on imports?
Exactly. Not really importing copper, and they're not exporting a huge chunk of their U.S. production either.
Got it. Okay, so that focus on U.S. production.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Seems even more relevant now.
More important than ever.
Considering.
Yeah, with all the geopolitical stuff going on.
The whole global landscape.
Right, and the emphasis on securing those domestic supply chains.
Right, for those critical materials.
Absolutely. It's all about shoring up those supply chains.
And the article actually mentions that the current U.S. administration is likely to be very supportive.
Yeah, I think it's a safe bet.
Of boosting production.
Either boosting domestic production.
Of essential metals, like copper.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's good news for Freeport.
That's a tailwind for Freeport, for sure.
Yeah. And on top of that, Freeport isn't just relying on their existing mines.
Right. They're not just sitting still.
They're not just sitting still.
Yeah.
They've got these plans to actually increase their output.
They've got some pretty ambitious plans.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
Through what are called brownfield expansions. So they're going to expand their existing mine sites in Arizona.
So they're leveraging their existing infrastructure.
Exactly.
Smart move.
And they're thinking that this could add up to an additional 650 million pounds.
That's a lot of copper.
Of copper production every year.
Yeah, that's a huge potential increase.
Which is a ton.
Yeah, that's significant.
But it's not just about expanding existing mines either. They've also got this really interesting initiative that focuses on leaching.
This is fascinating.
Can you explain what that is?
So essentially, it involves recovering copper from existing stockpiles of mining waste.
So like stuff they already have.
Exactly. They're basically going back and saying, hey, we can squeeze more value out of this.
It's almost like recycling in a way.
It's kind of like mining recycling,
Yeah.
They're estimating that this leaching process could add another 800 million pounds of copper per year by 2030.
Wow.
So when you combine that with the brownfield expansions,
right,
that's a huge amount of new copper coming online.
Yeah, and their current production forecast is around 4 billion pounds of copper in 2025.
Right.
So these potential increases are pretty significant.
They're game changers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those expansion plans and the focus on the U.S. definitely show
it paints a picture.
A company with a clear path for future growth.
Yeah. They're positioned well for the future.
But the Motley Fool analysis also points to
they highlight
this broader long-term factor.
This megatrend.
Driving copper demand.
This is the big one.
Which is this idea of the electrification of everything.
The electrification of everything.
So can you break that down?
Of course.
Like, why is copper so crucial?
So copper is essential to so many aspects of our modern world and where it's headed. You know, think about electric vehicles.
Okay.
EVs.
Okay.
they need way more copper wiring than traditional gas-powered cars.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole charging infrastructure.
Right.
All those charging stations popping up.
You need a lot of copper for that.
Oh, yeah, they're copper intensive.
Yeah.
Some estimates say an EV can have 2 to 4 times as much copper as a regular car with an internal combustion engine.
That's wild.
That's a lot of copper.
And it's not just transportation.
No, it's way bigger than that.
It's energy, too.
Absolutely.
Right.
Renewables like solar and wind power, they need these massive networks to transmit and distribute electricity.
Yeah, and copper is the material for that.
Copper is king when it comes to power grids.
And then you've got...
The article also mentions...
the Internet of Things.
The Internet of Things.
All these devices.
All these connected devices.
Yeah, your smart fridge, your smart toaster.
All need copper.
All running on copper.
Yeah.
And of course, the biggest thing these days...
Right.
AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
What we often forget is how much energy all those data centers gobble up.
It's huge.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And those data centers and the electricity generation needed to power them.
Yeah.
They need tons of copper.
Yeah.
For the wiring, the cooling systems.
The infrastructure.
The whole shebang.
It's like no matter where you look.
Everywhere you look.
Transportation, energy, connectivity, AI.
It's copper, copper.
Copper. Copper is the building block.
It's the foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the article refers to all this as...
the electrification of everything. The electrification of everything.
That's the umbrella term.
And they make a good point that while, you know, individual sectors might see dips or slowdowns.
Like they mentioned EV sales might fluctuate a bit.
Yeah. They gave the example of EV sales.
Yeah.
It's unlikely that all of these demand drivers will weaken at the same time.
Exactly. They're not all going to go down together.
So it suggests a pretty robust outlook.
Yeah, very robust.
Long-term.
Long-term demand for copper is very strong.
So you've got this powerful long-term demand.
Yeah.
And Freeport McMoRan's ability to increase their production.
Right.
And their strong U.S. focus.
Yeah.
This is why the Motley Fool analysis suggests that this dip might be a buying opportunity.
A chance to get in.
They're essentially saying that the market is overreacting.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
To the Indonesian smelter and the tariff stuff.
Right.
And they're underestimating the long-term drivers.
The bigger picture.
For copper demand.
Yeah.
The fundamentals.
And Freeport's potential.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's wrap this up.
Okay.
What are our takeaways?
Yeah, what are the key points?
So Freeport stock has been declining.
It's taken a hit.
Which seems kind of strange given the high copper price.
Right. That's the disconnect.
And this decline is being driven by concerns about the Indonesian smelter and maybe some exaggerated fears about U.S. tariffs.
Right.
But the bigger picture is that Freeport has a strong focus on U.S. operations.
Right.
They've got these ambitious plans to boost production through mine expansions and leaching. Right. And there's this overarching long-term surge.
That megatrend.
In copper demand.
The electrification of everything.
Because of the electrification of everything.
Oh, exactly.
So the Motley Fool analysis is basically saying...
they're arguing...
that this disconnect between the stock price and the fundamentals...
the fundamentals are strong.
...could be an attractive entry point for investors.
Yeah, good time to buy. So yeah, this has been a really insightful...
I think so too.
Look into Freeport McMoRan.
Yeah.
It really highlights how short-term market fluctuations and news can sometimes create opportunities.
Yeah, if you can see past the noise.
For those who can see the bigger picture.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
The long-term trends.
No name.
It's been a fascinating deep dive.
It has been, and it leaves us with a really interesting question for our listeners.
Okay, what's that?
Given how vital copper is becoming to all these new technologies, how might unexpected events, geopolitical shifts or technological breakthroughs, how might they impact copper's demand and price in the future?
Yeah, what could shake things up?
Exactly, and thinking beyond copper.
Yeah.
What other industries might be affected by similar trends?
Right. What are their critical materials?
Yeah, what else should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, what are the other big players?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it's food for thought. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Always a pleasure.